Hi, hello all. Thank you for coming down. Um, first of all, I have kept the presentation quite short because I'd like to sort of have a lot of time for Q&A. So please, if you have any questions, keep them ready. Let's make it very conversational because fundraising journey for everybody is very different. And you might have your own challenges, your own questions. So I'd be happy to answer them for you. But just to get started with the presentation. How many of you guys here have raised funding from VCs before? Yeah. And how many of you guys are wanting to raise but haven't been able to raise it or not quite sure how to go about raising? Yes, that's most of the audience. And you might be wondering, what's unique about these companies that these companies have been able to raise funding, not just raise funding, but also large amounts of it in a very short period of time? So I would say, in a simple, short answer, there is no real formula except investor founder fit. So what you're building is one, but do you have fit with what investors are looking for is really important before you're able to raise capital. And I think that's what I like to sort of delve a little deeper into, that what are investors looking for and how should you go about really pitching to investors in a way that it connects with them. But before that, just a short intro about ourselves. I'm the founder of Eximius Ventures. We are a micro VC fund based out of Delhi. We've made 4 investments in gaming so far across casual, Web3, infra, as well as esports. And in addition to that, we've also launched an IP called the Gaming Lounge, where the entire focus is to bring community, knowledge, and capital together so that we can grow and propel together. So with that, let's sort of talk a little bit more about how to raise capital from VCs. Just to sort of put things into context and where we stand as a gaming ecosystem, right? One thing that we have seen is in the last 5 years, the Indian gaming ecosystem has really started to gain prominence. As you can see, the market size has grown multifold, but is also expected to grow from 1.8 billion in 2020 to 5 billion in 2025. And to support that growth, we have seen almost 3x increase in funding that came in 2021 as opposed to the previous 6 years. I mean, that's phenomenal, isn't it? And even more important, before we were only seeing real money gaming platforms gain prominence and receive capital. But in the last 1 year, casual gaming, esports, and other genres and subgenres have started to come in, where investors have become aware of it. They have evolved to start investing in this segment as well. But this is not just a phenomena in India. This is also happening globally. I mean, of course, driven by the tailwinds from pandemic. That in 2021 we saw 4x growth in funding, and some of that capital that has started to come in is actually finding its way to different ways to grow. One is consolidation. Some of the biggest acquisitions have happened in the last couple years. As you can see, the likes of Microsoft, Sony have acquired big studios, but also this capital has started to sort of come into India and, and other emerging markets. And I think that is more important for us because we've seen the likes of Moonfrog and Play Simple get acquired. This I'm pretty sure that most of you guys who are building are already aware of. This is driven by some of the tailwinds. We have one of the youngest population in the world. We have 400 million people who are in the Gen Z community. They already have access to smartphone. So we have 800 million people that have access to smartphone, and the rural penetration of smartphone continues to grow. We are seeing a lot of people consuming content in vernacular and rural areas. So this is a market that you can start to build for. This is, of course, driven by cheap internet. And more important, that 50%, about 50% of our population that otherwise what was not very active is actually a very active gamer now, and that is women. And that's an area that people haven't necessarily started building for, that is completely left untapped. So you might say that, when all of this is happening, why are we still struggling to fundraise, right? Why aren't we getting all the capital that we want? That's because there is a starking difference in terms of the growth that we have seen and where we still stand as opposed to our counterparts, let's say US or Asia. India forms 15% of the player base, but gets only 5% of the funding. And that's dismal. That's one third of what we should actually be getting. And while there are other segments that have started to get, it's only a small chunk of companies that are receiving this funding, while the long tail of companies are not able to see funding at all. So to be precise, only 28 companies in 2021 received all the capital that we saw on the first slide come in. This is driven by a few factors. We have hell of a regulatory landscape. I mean, something that we cannot do a lot about, but as a community, we can start to sort of function in that direction. Because today, the regulatory environment that we have is still from the 19th century. There have been a few sort of verdicts that have come about to change it, but no concrete law. Second is our ill-defined IP laws. Today, if you work on a new innovation, there is very little incentive to really do something because you cannot protect your IP. Even if somebody copy pastes your game and takes it ahead, you're not able to necessarily sort of protect that. The third is, of course, monetization. We've all been talking about it. Having said that, in the last few years, we've seen that change. Today, about 80 to 100 million people in India are paying, but they're not paying as much. Of course, what was 80-20 ad to in-app purchases is going up to almost 60-40, which is 60% of the people are still on ad, but 40% continue to want to pay through in-app purchases. But there's a long way that we can actually cover there. And I think the last one, which I believe that all of us together, and IDGC is already doing a great job on, can do, is the lack of mentorship ecosystem. Where we are at a stage where, as a gaming ecosystem, as a gaming community, we have to work together, help each other out to really take this to the next level and take it to a global scale so that all the capital that we can potentially get as the emerging Asian market comes to us. There are already a few VCs that are working on it, which is a great thing for all of us, and some of the capital has started to come in. But I think if you remember the first point that I made, so up to now, if you haven't been listening, don't worry. I think this is where you need to start listening, because this is where like the important aspect starts. But how do you find an investor founder fit? Or how do you make sure that the VCs that we have listed in the previous slide, or all the funding that has come, actually starts to sort of come into the ideas that you are building as well? One of the biggest things that often we have seen founders miss out on is the themes that excite VCs. Typically, a VC would have a thesis. They would be doing their own research, or they would be trying to figure out what are the areas that excites them on the basis of what they are seeing globally. And they would be talking about it either in global forum, public forums, or internally in their memos. So really being able to see if the idea that you're building on aligns with what they have in mind, sort of gets that first tick going. Because they know that this is something that we're excited about, let's at least get on a call to delve deeper. So some of the themes that we have identified, the first one, which is a big one, is India-centric themes. Like we all have been talking about how Indian consumers, there are 400 million players today, and they have been playing games. A lot of them are actually consuming global games today. They are getting used to global mechanics, global genres, but what is a big gap is that can we really create these mechanics for them in Indian themes? Can we sort of bring about those Indian sensibilities in our game so that the rural population that is wanting to consume content, that is increasingly consuming content, starts to align better with it? Not just the rural, but also the urban population that has grown up listening to different stories. The second is social gaming. I mean, we all sort of love to interact with our friends, right? We'll all go out and play different games. And since the last few years, we've also started doing that online. There are about 25% people under the age of 35 who say that they enjoy connecting with friends more over online games than actually chatting with them on one of the apps or social media apps. That's a huge population. And this can grow further. So that's a big opportunity to really build for. In fact, what is interesting is that you can combine the two. where you can build social games for India and can really get that virality going. Because if you go to, visit tier 3, tier 4 cities, you'll see that people are always hanging out in little groups outside different pawn shops or different sort of areas and starting to play games together. Can you get them a game that they can play together there itself? That is social gaming for India. Another trend, which I'm pretty sure as a buzzword all of you guys have heard of quite a bit now, is Web3 gaming. But the dismal part about Web3 game is that the penetration is less than 1%. We've been talking about it, we've been building about it. I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have probably thought either I want to pivot to a Web3 game or can I add a monetization layer through a Web3 game. But so far, we've seen only 2 million people ever interact with Web3 games and 100 to 200K people who are active today. That's because most of these people weren't gamers. They were traders or they were yield seeking people who were coming and trying to generate more returns. But having said that, there is immense scope in Web3 game for one to actually create an interoperable ecosystem. So can we start building for actual gamers in Web3 and add different layers to be able to bring that out? And last is, of course, infra play. To get all the ecosystem and all the studio going, how can we work on dev tools to do that faster? Once we have aligned on ideas, that's the first check, right? Now you know that you're working on an idea that one of the investor understands, they are curious about, and they would like to get on a call, and they would want you to actually pitch to them. But this is where we see a lot of people falter, is once my idea is good, how do I really get the investor excited? What will get this person, he or she, to start writing checks to me? I think, you might look at this and you might say that, okay, at the early stages, I will never have all of this ready. And nobody expects you to have all of this ready. But thinking through all of it and knowing what your approach could potentially be is what helps. So I'll go through them one by one. I think the first very important aspect for us is team. We want to understand that the team that is coming in has the right domain expertise. That means that the genre or the subgenre that they're building for, have they built in that genre before? If not, have they done their market research to understand what really clicks with that genre? How much time have they spent really building or interacting with their user cohorts? And more important, are they honest with themselves to tell that what is it that they don't know and they need to hire for? Because see, for any founder or founding team, they might not know everything. But often being able to figure out your blind spots and really say that, एक दो तीन चीज़ें तो मुझे पता है and we can figure it out. But the minute I get my capital, these are the other things that I would want to hire for. That becomes very important. So that together as a team, you have that founder and product fit. कि जितना भी founding team है, can if I were to give them capital and the product that they're trying to build just aligns right away and they can start to execute. I think this will be the biggest component that any pre-seed stage investor is really looking for. And if you're speaking to the right investor, you'll also see that 40 to 50% of their time goes in just addressing the first one, where they will be talking to you, your co-founders, your team, to be able to figure this out. The second is the prevalent gap in the market. This is what we were talking about in the previous slide, that what are the different gaps that currently investors are really excited about. But I think more important than that is for you to align that whatever game you are building has a wedge. Wedge can come in different ways. Wedge can be that a game is working really well in the West. Hey, but there is no version of it in India. I want to create a version. Second, it is working really well for one user persona. Now I want to start sort of creating it for different user persona. Or the third could be that it is working very well for one storyline, one theme, but I can use those mechanics to start creating another theme. Either way, whatever is the wedge that you're really sort of thinking. Oh, actually, the fourth one, which is very exciting, but I don't think a lot of us think about, is subgenre evolution, right? That a genre is doing very well. How can I start thinking of the new ways to evolve this? Um, you know, and I think more important than pitching this to the investor would be for you to really sort of get that right and know that wherever you are building, there is a space for you to actually go and acquire customer. Because once you're acquiring customer from another game or another app, it doesn't work. You have to have your own inherent sort of customer base that you can create through this wedge or through this IP for you to sort of move forward. The third is deep, compelling narratives. This goes without saying. You need to have really strong storylines, interesting content. People come for content, they stay for for mechanics and for engagement, right? So can you really bring them? Are you giving them that first 10-second, 20-second experience so that somebody gets super excited with what sort of lies ahead? But not just there, also continuing to sort of build on that and say that, okay, if my D0 to D7 content is this, what will be my storyline beyond that, from D7 to D15, D15 and beyond, and so on, right? The fourth, which I think is really important, and I know I've been saying this for every single one of them, but this is my favorite in particular, because you can be building a rocket ship inside, you can be building the best game that exists inside. But if it stays in your studio and nobody plays it, it's of no use. I'm sorry. So if you're not thinking of your GTM from day one, then you're not really doing justice to all the time and the effort that you're spending in actually building that game. Because that game needs to be in the hands of your users, and you need to know what they're liking, what they're not liking. GTM can happen in 3 or 4 different ways. Ad performance marketing is the easiest way to go about it. But also start to create communities. Start to sort of create, identify the user persona, their preference, 100, 200 member small community, and put the game as soft launch, beta launch in their hand, and continue to sort of chat with them on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, to see what are they liking, what they're not liking. When do they stop using it, and why are they stopping to use it? So that you can bring all of those learnings inside and actually sort of one, refine your product, iterate on your product, but also refine your GTM. Because when you know you need to scale, you also have identified what are the user personas and what are they liking, so that you can target. You might know that any particular user persona gets saturated after some time. If you're going after the 14 to 18-year-old girls, until a few million you might be able to hit them, but beyond that, to go deeper, you might not. So can you start to figure out what are the adjacent personas as well? The next one would be monetization. I think that's the hardest to talk about. And nobody sort of says that you need to figure out monetization or you need to have monetization the first day. But having thought process, that if I'm designing this compelling content and I'm reaching out to XYZ people with this preference, what are the different engagement points? What are the different interaction points that I can build across the entire game where I can potentially nudge them? If you're building a free-to-play game, of course you don't want your entire user base to convert. Also, you don't want to have too many hooks because you're gonna start losing them. So how do I manage retention and monetization at the same time? Is it through ads or is it through other ways? And then the final one would be live ops. A lot of people focus so much on getting their initial sort of game out that at some point in their entire roadmap, they haven't thought through that once I have kept my initial user for a few days, what do I do with them afterwards? Some of it can be stories, but what other content? How do I keep generating that content? Are there side missions that are planned? Are there levels that are planned? Are there variable outcomes that you can build in? Some of that thought process has to go during your beta launch itself, so that later you are not changing the gameplay. Later you have whatever you were building, a continuation sort of comes about, which is very seamless, very smooth, and just sort of continues to go. I think with that, I have sort of mentioned 4 or 5 different aspects that an investor really looks for. And if you're able to address most of this in your pitch, I won't be able to guarantee that you can get funding, but you'll at least get the investor excited to start digging in further, so that you can arrive at a product, one, that actually works, that is much better, much smarter than what you had, and two, also educate yourself along the way, right? Because you're getting feedback. Another thing I would like to say is that a lot of people sort of approach fundraising as, what is the end goal for me to actually get the capital? But it is also about getting feedback and getting honest feedback. If somebody is not giving you capital, just asking yourself and asking them why they might not be giving it, and then sort of going back to your drawing board and sort of figuring out what are the loopholes. Don't take everybody's advice. Everybody's not right, and maybe some of those advice don't work for you. But can you take most of those advice, assimilate, and think for yourself in the first principle basis that what is working and what is not working? So with that, I would say that just three sort of final thoughts to best position yourself. Build in public, keep creating cohort, keep putting things out, be open to feedback, work on feedback. Have clear user personas you are going after. Don't expect users to find you, but you find your users first and target them very closely. And third, know what content you're gonna keep sort of building. And I think this three is the last one that I would want to leave with, because regardless of everything else and funding, this will help you just in your journey of building. So with that, towards the end, if you guys have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. The idea was to leave a lot of time for Q&A so that we can get everybody's fundraising journey seamless. Thank you. Please.
Hi, thanks so much, Paul. My name is Som. I've been asking this question in other forums as well, but very quickly, gaming investment is a very nuanced, again, investment per se, because the kind of metrics that you would look at, the kind of lens you'd look at a game is very different from a generic product that exists in the ecosystem. You mentioned a lot of those criteria, which happen to be subjective and in terms of game understanding, but as an investor, how do you understand, again, how do you look at the game specific numbers? How much does that come into play as opposed to the subjective parameters? And how do game developers have a view and build a view to it?
Yeah. No, so essentially what you're asking is that how do we look at metrics?
What's the evaluation criteria? How much of it is subjective? How
Yeah.
much of it is metrics?
So see, what I have mentioned here is more for pre-seed stage, seed stage. This here the assumption is that you're not at Series A where some of the metrics would really be refined. Because once the metrics are refined and you're raising a larger round, at that point it will be on the basis of that. But every single genre, subgenre, game, non-gaming investments have certain metrics that work for them, right? And those metrics are defined on the basis of what is the core proposition of that product. Let's say if you are building a hyper casual game, you're building for somebody who has 10 or 15 minutes in a day, is probably a working professional who's tired and wanting to sort of spend time, and probably doesn't care about paying too much. But if you put one sort of good hook, they might end up paying then and there. So now the metrics for that particular sort of product and that mindset will be very different from something else. And hence, when you're evaluating it as well, you're looking at a subgenre level and at sometimes product level as well. But these are more generic that one should think of even when the metrics are not ready. Because here you will not be able to define the metrics.
Yeah, hello. Yeah,
Yes.
my question is, what should be the ideal company track record before you ask any investor to put put their confidence in you? Like, what should the company have before presenting themselves?
So you might be aware that nowadays companies are getting funded with limited track record. But what is important there is the team's track record. What that means is that what has the team done in the past? Not necessarily where what is the point where they are at, but what their slope has been. How quickly have they grown? How quickly have they adapted to new ideas coming their way? And as a result of that, what are the experiences that they have had? Most of the pre-seed stage companies like or investors like ourselves, we can take a bet at an idea stage. We can also take a bet at an MVP stage, where an MVP is ready with a little bit of trailer, maybe a playable demo. But what we want to know is that to arrive at that MVP, how much work has the team done and how quickly have they learned?
Thank you.
Hi, that was an insightful session.
Thank you.
My question is more generic in nature. We are seeing a sort of downward trend in funding overall. I'm not talking about the specific industry. Gaming, I think somehow I feel is not in line with other industries like fintech or I don't know, tech and all this. So in coming times, maybe in 23, we spoke about trends in 21 and 22, but in 23, what sort of trend you guys are seeing in usual in gaming?
Yeah,
Fro-
no, that's a really good question because I didn't address the funding winter, which is something that's
Yes,
looming in
yes.
everybody's mind, right? We are clearly not in an ecosystem where funding was coming as easily as last year, just because of some primary macro factors. The Fed had printed over $3 trillion. Interest rates were close to zero, and hence to go and actually bet on, uh, riskier companies was much easier because you weren't getting the returns from anywhere else. Now that environment has started to change. Money is being rolled back, interest rates have increased, people's appetite to invest in riskier assets have changed, and as a result of that, valuations have corrected. And to a large extent, expectation of what is fundable and what is not fundable has also changed. And that has happened across board, including gaming. But I would also say that that has happened more in the growth stage and the late stage companies as opposed to the early stage companies. Because in the early stages, yes, there is a pairing of valuation that has happened. If you were getting $1 million last year, you might get 800K or 500K this year, but there is capital available. And people are taking active bets.
So seed and pre-seed is somewhere we can see
Up to
keep seeing
Series A as well.
a Series A as well. Okay.
Maybe slightly.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
I think it depends on the investor's own thesis as well. How large is their fund? What is the check size they are writing? But as a rule of thumb, I would say that for a pre-seed stage investor, lower double digit is what is good for you to dilute.
Okay.
So lower double digit would be like 15,
15,
10 to
20.
15%.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, matlab, I can understand right now, but it depends again when we have a talk with investor how it will go.
Yeah.
Correct. The amount that we want to build a game. Correct.
Yeah. So typically, what one should do is that how to define the amount that you want to raise. You have to first understand that what is your goal for the next 18 months. In the next 18 months, what metrics can you reasonably achieve? At that metric, how much funding can you raise? And then work backwards. Because every round you have to increase your valuation by at least 3x, raise at least 3x of the amount, and that is what is considered healthy and considered good, right? So if you want to raise 1.5 million in the next 3 years and the metrics required for 1.5 million is a few things like xyz, then you have to work backwards and say that, okay, I require 500K today to achieve those metrics to be able to get there, and hence for 500K I should look to dilute 15%.
Got it.
Yeah, hi. What are your advices for console games? Because most of the VCs and studios currently are focused on mobile and social gaming, but there are studios who want to focus on hardcore Xbox, those kind of
Yeah.
games.
So see, I think for VCs, we look for scalable model, right? To understand that the way a VC bets is they say that I'll bet on 10 companies. If two of them take off, I'm sorted. So for that, those two have to be so massively scalable that they're actually able to compensate for everything else. Which means that if 82 to 85% of your population that is playing games is on a certain platform, that platform is going to be given more preference than any other platform otherwise. Having said that, I wouldn't necessarily say that would mean you shouldn't build for that segment. But for a VC, as per their model, that is what they're going to be more focused on.
Hi. Normally for the startup, how the valuation is being done for the gaming companies? What are the parameters which need to be considered?
Again, depends on which stage you are at. At the very, very early stages, it's more of an art than a science. People typically sort of, up to seed, people look at ownership percentage and the math that I was trying to do here. Beyond that, Series A onwards, then it will be metrics, primarily metrics around your monthly growth, retention, your D3 retention, and the monetization that you're getting, as opposed to the CAC that it's costing you to actually acquire a customer. So these would be 3 or 4 metrics that an investor would look at very closely. And I wouldn't be able to necessarily give you more details because it'll have to be very genre and subgenre specific.
Hey, hi. So my question is from more of a initial community building point of view. You said that you test your game with 100 or 200 users when you don't have the full game, right? How do you get those community, and wouldn't that community be biased? Because if you are giving that game, then that game, those set of people would be very core users, not maybe your actual target set.
That's a fantastic one. And that is what I was talking about when I said user cohorts. Because you have the power to create that community, right? You know who to give your games in the hands of. So it's very important that that community is created a little bit more thoughtfully, in terms of, let's say, if I think that for this particular game my user base is anywhere between 18-year-old to 30-year-old, of tier 1 tier 2 cities, male and female, then are you able to create one individual community of each of these different personas and one combined community by either sort of going and meeting these people and bringing them onto a platform like a Discord or a WhatsApp, whatever works best for you, or by sort of working with folks that are creating communities and collaborating to bring it. But it'll be important to ensure that you're actually testing it across multiple different groups as opposed to just your core user, which is where you'll see that a lot of companies are able to scale to a million and a half, and that is where they're stagnant because they haven't done the work of actually going beyond that.